Meanwhile, in Saudi Arabia, the Prince Sultan Air Base has also come under attack.
Hello viewer. Welcome to Dokiza TV. I want us to focus on the US-Israel and Iran ceasefire that changed everything. How Iran won the war without firing the last shot. While Trump had threatened Iran to submit within 4 hours on April 7, that threat seems to have turned into a Pakistan's 2-week miracle, that is temporary ceasefire. Let me take you back to April 6, just 2 days before the ceasefire. Donald Trump stood at a White House podium and issued what can only be described as a threat bordering on a war crime. He gave Iran a deadline: reopen the Strait of Hormuz by 8 p.m. on April 7, or else. The "or else" was chillingly specific. Trump announced that American warplanes had a plan to destroy every single bridge and every single power station inside Iran in just 4 hours. He said Iranian cities would be plunged into fire and explosion that could never be repaired. When a reporter asked whether destroying civilian infrastructure and cutting off electricity to millions of ordinary Iranians amounted to punishing the people rather than the government, Trump's response was stunning. He claimed that Iranians were willing to suffer. He said they want to hear the sound of bombs. This was not a president describing military necessity. This was a president describing collective punishment. But here is where the story takes its first unexpected turn. While Trump was posturing, something was happening behind the scenes. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif had been working both sides of the conflict. He made an earnest request to the United States: extend the bombing deadline by 2 weeks. Simultaneously, he asked Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz for the same period as a goodwill gesture. What happened next caught the world off guard. Trump announced on his Truth Social platform that he was suspending bombing operations for 2 weeks. He explicitly credited his decision to conversations with Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif and Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir, who personally requested that the destructive force being sent to Iran be held back. Iran responded in kind. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced that Iranian armed forces would cease what they termed defensive operations if attacks against Iran were halted. Safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz would be possible for 2 weeks via coordination with Iran's armed forces. The global reaction was immediate and telling. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz thanked Pakistan for its mediation. Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim praised Pakistan's tireless and courageous diplomacy and its willingness to speak to all sides, without fear or favor. The United Kingdom's High Commissioner to Pakistan acknowledged the quiet, effective, diplomatic role Pakistan had played. Even Australia, Egypt, Oman, Indonesia, and New Zealand joined the chorus of appreciation. But here is what you need to understand: this was not a ceasefire negotiated on equal terms. This was a ceasefire negotiated on Iran's terms. At this juncture, let's talk about the 10 points that exposed who really holds the power. The Iranian Supreme National Security Council issued a statement in the early hours of April 8 that made this crystal clear. The statement declared that Iran had rejected every single peace proposal put forward by the United States. Instead, Iran had drafted its own 10-point plan and submitted it through Pakistan. And here is the kicker: the United States agreed to use Iran's plan as the basis for negotiations. Let me list those 10 points for you, because they tell you everything you need to know about how the balance of power has shifted. Point 1. A binding American commitment to ensure no further acts of aggression against Iran. Not a promise. A commitment. Point 2. Continued Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz, coordinated with Iran's armed forces. In plain English, Iran decides who passes and when. Point 3. Acceptance of Iran's right to enrich uranium. This is the nuclear red line that the United States and Israel have spent 2 decades trying to erase. Iran just put it back on the table. Point 4 and 5, lifting of all primary and secondary sanctions. All of them. Point 6 and 7, termination of all United Nations Security Council resolutions against Iran and termination of all International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors resolutions against Iran. This is not sanctions relief. This is erasing the entire international legal architecture that has been used to isolate Iran. Point 8, a full payment of damages to Iran for war losses, to be determined through assessment. Point 9, complete withdrawal of United States combat forces from the entire region. Not redeployment. Withdrawal. Point 10, cessation of hostilities across all fronts, including Lebanon. That means Israel must stop attacking Hezbollah. And there is one more detail that the English language versions of the proposal did not always include. According to reports, Iran also demanded that any vessel passing through the Strait of Hormuz pay a transit fee of approximately $2 million, to be shared with Oman. Iran intends to use its share of these fees to rebuild infrastructure damaged by American and Israeli bombs, rather than seeking direct compensation from the United States. Let that sink in. Iran is not asking for a handout. Iran is not begging for aid. Iran is imposing a toll on the world's most important shipping lane and using the revenue to rebuild what the United States destroyed. The Iranian statement concluded with a phrase that would have been unthinkable before this war: the United States has, in principle, committed to these terms. Not agreed to negotiate. Committed. From paper tiger to regional superpower, what this ceasefire really means. To understand the magnitude of what has just happened, you need to rewind to February 28, the day the war began. The United States and Israel launched their attack while Oman-brokered negotiations were still in progress. They assumed that decapitating Iran's leadership would cause the regime to collapse. They assumed that Iran's military was a paper tiger. They assumed that the Gulf states would rally behind them. They assumed that Europe would send warships to force open the Strait of Hormuz. Every single one of those assumptions was wrong. Iran did not collapse. It fought back, and it fought back hard. American air bases across the Gulf were struck. Israeli cities were hit. The Fifth Fleet's headquarters in Bahrain was damaged. A $1 billion early warning radar system in Qatar was destroyed. And when the United States tried to force the Strait of Hormuz open, Iran simply refused to budge. Instead, a maritime traffic shifted to a dual-corridor system that left Iran's Revolutionary Guards in control of the northern route, while a new southern corridor along the Omani coast emerged as a workaround. But even that southern corridor operated on Iran's terms. The Gulf states that host American bases, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, did not mobilize to strike back at Iran. Not one of them. Europe refused to send warships. Germany, Finland, Sweden, Poland, the Netherlands, all said no. Trump complained publicly that NATO was useless, that Japan and South Korea and Australia were not helping, that Germany could not be trusted with military secrets. The American president, standing at the White House podium, was reduced to blaming his allies for not bailing him out of a war he started. And then came the ceasefire. But not just any ceasefire. A ceasefire negotiated on the basis of Iran's demands, not America's. A ceasefire in which Iran's 10 points became the working document. A ceasefire in which Iran secured American commitment to sanctions relief, uranium enrichment, and the withdrawal of combat forces from the region. Let me be blunt, this is not how wars are supposed to end for the side that claims to have won. The United States entered this war expecting to dictate terms to Iran. It is leaving this war accepting terms dictated by Iran. What does this mean for Iran's standing in the Gulf and on the global stage? Everything. In the Gulf, Iran has demonstrated that it can shut down the world's most important oil choke point and suffer no meaningful military consequence. The Gulf states now know that their American security umbrella is full of holes. They watched American bases on their soil get hit. They watched American warships withdraw. They watched European allies refuse to come. They watched their own populations, many of whom sympathize with the Palestinian cause, react with ambivalence or outright hostility to a war they did not ask for. The Gulf states will now have to recalibrate. Some may quietly seek accommodation with Tehran. Others may accelerate their pursuit of alternative security arrangements involving Turkey, Pakistan, or even China. On the global stage, the message is even clearer. A medium-sized power, under sustained aerial bombardment from the world's most advanced air forces, not only survived but extracted concessions from its attacker. That has not happened in decades. The last time a non-nuclear state forced the United States to the negotiating table on its own terms was, well, arguably never. Even Vietnam was a protracted ground war, not an air campaign followed by a ceasefire negotiated on the losing side's terms. Iran has also exposed the limits of American military power in a way that no adversary has managed since the end of the Cold War. The United States spent billions of dollars on precision-guided munitions, stealth aircraft, and naval carriers. It launched a surprise attack against a country already weakened by decades of sanctions. And yet, after 40 days of war, Iran's leadership is intact, its military is still operational, its control over the Strait of Hormuz is stronger than before, and its nuclear program has received de facto international recognition. The shame of the paper tiger and the rise of a new order. Let me end with an observation about reputation, because that is ultimately what this war has cost the United States and Israel. For decades, the narrative pushed by Zionist-dominated international media has painted Iran as an irrational, aggressive, destabilizing force. Iran was the villain. Iran was the threat. Iran was the reason the Middle East could not have peace. This war has shredded that narrative. When the United States and Israel launched their attack on February 28, there were active negotiations underway. Iran was at the table. Iran was willing to talk. The Trump administration chose bombs over diplomacy. And then, when Iran refused to break, the United States resorted to threatening to destroy civilian infrastructure, bridges, power stations, entire cities, while claiming that ordinary Iranians wanted to hear the sound of bombs. Who does that sound like? Who threatens to destroy civilian infrastructure and then blames the victims for wanting it? The contrast could not be starker. Iran, the supposed aggressor, spent the war insisting that it was conducting defensive operations. Iran, the supposed isolationist, accepted Pakistani mediation and agreed to a ceasefire. Iran, the supposed irrational actor, produced a detailed 10-point proposal and secured American agreement to use it as the basis for negotiations. The United States, by contrast, spent the war threatening to commit war crimes, alienating its allies, failing to achieve its military objectives, and ultimately accepting terms dictated by the country it attacked. There is a word for this. The critics are right. The United States has revealed itself to be a paper tiger. Its warships withdrew. Its carriers caught fire. Its European allies refused to help. Its Gulf partners stayed silent. Its threats were empty. Its deadline passed. And in the end, the man who promised to make America strong again was reduced to thanking Pakistan for asking him not to bomb Iranian civilians. Iran has emerged from this war far stronger than it entered it. It has demonstrated military resilience, diplomatic sophistication, and strategic patience. It has secured American commitment to sanctions relief, uranium enrichment, and troop withdrawal. It has established itself as the undisputed regional superpower, capable of dictating terms to the United States itself. And Israel? Israel watched its air defenses fail. It watched Iranian missiles strike its cities. It watched its American ally negotiate a ceasefire that did not even include a halt to hostilities in Lebanon. The dream over a greater Israel, openly discussed by Israeli leaders, now looks more distant than ever. This war has changed the Middle East. But more than that, it has changed the world's understanding of who holds power, who deserves respect, and who has been lying to us all along. The paper tiger has been exposed. The regional superpower has been identified. And the ceasefire of April 8, 2026, will be remembered as the day Iran won without firing the last shot. Thank you, viewer, for your time and support. Please click that subscriber button to be getting my notifications every time I post something on Dokiza TV. Thank you.